"They don't belong here," muttered the officer, his hand resting on his holstered gun, his eyes narrowing as he watched the man walk out of the bar. The atmosphere was charged, thick with tension that no one dared to cut through. "What's your problem, officer?" the man asked calmly, his voice steady but firm. His broad shoulders and calm demeanor made him stand out, but not in the way the group of officers liked. He was confident. Too confident, they thought. "Step over here," barked another officer, his tone dripping with authority and a tinge of something uglier, something unmistakably racist. "You think you can just waltz out of here like that, huh? Acting like you own the place?" The man raised his eyebrows, his lips twitching in a faint, incredulous smile. "Like what?" "Walking," he replied, his voice tinged with a quiet defiance that sent a ripple of discomfort through the group. "Don't get smart with us," one officer spat, stepping closer, his chest puffed out in a show of dominance. The others followed, their formation deliberate, predatory. Onlookers outside the bar turned their heads, sensing the confrontation brewing. Some pulled out their phones, but most averted their gaze. This wasn't their fight, they told themselves that much. "What's this about?" the man asked again, more firmly this time. He wasn't afraid. That much was clear. And that was the problem. They wanted him to cower, to shrink, to become small and insignificant under their gaze. But he wouldn't. "You fit the description," said one officer, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Description of what?" "Don't play dumb," another officer snapped. "A disturbance. Someone acting aggressive. Causing problems." The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "So walking out of a bar is aggressive now?" "Hands on the hood," came the command. "Now." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The man's jaw clenched, but his hands remained at his sides. His calmness infuriated them, chipped away at their flimsy sense of control. "You don't want to do this," he said finally, his voice even, almost kind. But his words struck a nerve. "Don't tell me what I want," one officer roared, shoving him against the hood of a nearby patrol car. The metallic clang echoed through the street, drawing more stares, more phones raised silently to capture the scene. "This is your warning," the officer shouted, his voice rising with every word. "Stay in your lane, or we'll show you exactly what happens to people like you." "People like me?" The man's voice was muffled, his face pressed against the cold metal. But there was no mistaking the challenge in his tone. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "Shut up," the officer snapped, gripping the man's arm tighter, twisting it behind his back. "You sure you want to do this?" the man asked again, this time with a tone that made the officers pause, just for a fraction of a second. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was something else. Something that almost sounded like a warning. "Get him in the car," said another officer, brushing off the hesitation. They had the power. They had the numbers. And most importantly, they thought they had the law on their side. The man didn't resist. He didn't shout or curse or beg. He simply stood up, letting them shove him into the back of the car. His silence was deafening, his calmness almost unnerving. "Yeah, that's what I thought," muttered one of the officers, slamming the door shut. But as the patrol car pulled away, the man's eyes met one of the onlookers, a young woman holding her phone up, recording everything. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod before the car disappeared down the street. What the officers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was who they had just handcuffed and humiliated in front of half the neighborhood. They thought they were dealing with just another man they could bully, another victim who would quietly accept their abuse. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. Because the man in the back of that patrol car wasn't just anybody. He wasn't a bystander or a passerby or someone who didn't know his rights. He wasn't someone who would let this go. He was a Navy SEAL. Trained to survive. Trained to fight. Trained to win. And now, he was trained to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The question wasn't whether justice would be served. It was how. And when. Would it be in the courtroom? In the spotlight of public shame? Or somewhere far more personal, far more painful? One thing was certain, this was far from over. How do you fight someone who knows every tactic, every move, every loophole? Someone who has dedicated their life to outsmarting opponents far more dangerous than a group of corrupt officers? You don't. But these officers didn't know that. Yet. So, what will happen when the hunter becomes the hunted? When power is turned on its head, and those who thought they were untouchable are forced to answer for their actions? Stick around. This is a story of vengeance, justice, and redemption like you've never seen before. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Before we dive into today's story, we want to take a moment to speak directly to you. Here at Plow of Twist, we firmly stand against any form of racism, discrimination, or injustice. This channel is a safe space for everyone, and we believe in using storytelling to shed light on important issues, inspire change, and empower voices that need to be heard. To all our Black viewers watching today, you matter, your voice matters, and your story matters. We're with you. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready for an emotional roller coaster filled with twists, lessons, and justice. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Let's get started. Enjoy the story. The night air felt heavier than usual. The hum of voices, laughter, and clinking glasses spilled out from the dimly lit bar and onto the quiet street. The neon sign above flickered, casting a pale blue glow that washed over the cracked sidewalk. It was the kind of place that people visited to forget their problems or drown them entirely. But for Malik Carter, this night wasn't about forgetting. It was supposed to be a celebration. A new job offer, a step closer to the life he had always dreamed of, stable, respectable, and far removed from the chaos he had once thrived in. Malik wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. Standing at 6'3", with a build that suggested he could carry the weight of the world if necessary, he commanded attention without saying a word. His dark skin, sharp jawline, and steady eyes made him impossible to overlook. Yet, there was a softness in the way he carried himself, measured, deliberate. Every movement spoke of control, of discipline honed over years of training and sacrifice. It was a Friday night, and Malik had driven across town to meet his old friend Andre, someone who had always believed in him even when he barely believed in himself. The two had grown up together in the rougher parts of the city, where respect was earned in alleys and survival depended on knowing when to fight and when to run. But Malik had chosen another path, a path that led him to the Navy, and eventually to the elite ranks of the SEALs. His past wasn't something he talked about often. Most people didn't understand it. The late-night missions, the impossible odds, the losses. But it was part of him, buried beneath the calm exterior he now wore like armor. Andre, however, knew. He knew the struggles Malik had faced, the scars both visible and hidden. The two had spent the evening reminiscing, laughing about old memories, and raising glasses to new beginnings. But as the night stretched on, Andre had left early, leaving Malik to settle the tab and enjoy one last drink before heading out. The bar was nearly empty when Malik stepped outside. The air was cooler now, sharp against his skin. He took a deep breath, letting the stillness settle around him. That's when he saw them. 4 men leaning against a patrol car parked near the curb. Their uniforms practically glistened under the streetlights, badges polished to perfection. But it wasn't their appearance that caught Malik's attention, it was the way they looked at him. Like they were waiting for something. Officer Bradley Cole was the first to step forward. Stocky, with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, he carried himself like a man who expected the world to bend to his will. His partner, Eric Dawson, was taller, leaner, and carried an air of arrogance that felt almost rehearsed. The other two, John Mendez and Chris Tanner, lingered near the car, watching with predatory interest. Malik didn't flinch. He'd seen that look before, in hostile territories, in the eyes of men who thought power made them untouchable. "Evening," Malik said, keeping his voice calm but firm. Cole stepped closer. "Out a little late, aren't you?" Malik tilted his head slightly. "Didn't realize there was a curfew." Dawson smirked, but Cole's jaw tightened. "Smart mouth," he said. "Where you headed?" "Home," Malik replied. "I'm done here." "Not so fast," Cole said, stepping into his path. "We got a call about someone causing trouble at the bar tonight. You match the description." Malik's eyes narrowed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, every word hanging in the air like a challenge. "You're mistaken," he said. "I just stepped out to leave." "Maybe," Cole said, his tone sharpening. "But we'll need to check." "Hands on the hood." Malik's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. "For what?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Cole snapped, his voice louder now. The others stepped closer, their presence closing in. Malik glanced around. The street was empty except for a woman walking briskly on the opposite sidewalk. She paused when she saw what was happening, hesitating before pulling out her phone. Malik's eyes met hers for the briefest moment, but then Cole shoved him. "Hands on the hood," he barked. Malik took a slow breath. He had faced men with guns pointed at his head, bombs under his feet, and shadows that moved in the dark. But this was different. This wasn't combat. It was humiliation. "Don't," Malik said, his voice low but steady. Cole smirked. "Or what?" The shove came harder this time, and Malik's palms hit the cold surface of the patrol car. A hand gripped his wrist, twisting it back sharply, but Malik didn't resist. "Not yet." "Look at this guy," Dawson sneered. "Thinks he's something special." "He's about to learn he's not," Cole added. Malik could feel the adrenaline rising, his muscles tensing instinctively. He had been trained to fight, to adapt, to overpower. But he also knew control, knew how to read situations and calculate every possible outcome. He wasn't about to give them what they wanted. And yet, a fire burned inside him. Not just anger, something deeper. A need to make this right. But not here. Not now. The cuffs snapped around his wrists, cold and unyielding. As they shoved him into the back seat, he glanced out the window. The woman with the phone was still there, recording, her face a mix of fear and determination. Malik leaned back, letting his breathing steady. They thought they had won. They thought this would end with a report, a slap on the wrist, and another story swept under the rug. But Malik Carter wasn't just another name in a police file. He wasn't a man who would let this go unanswered. He was a SEAL. And these men had no idea what they had just started. Malik sat in a cold, dimly lit holding cell, his back against the wall, his wrists sore from the tightness of the cuffs they had only just removed. The walls seemed to close in, their pale, peeling paint reminding him more of a bunker than a police station. The small barred window near the ceiling allowed just enough moonlight to highlight the tension carved into his face. He stared at the flickering fluorescent light overhead, his jaw tight, his breaths measured. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger was too easy, too careless. What burned inside him wasn't anger, it was purpose. Outside the cell, the faint hum of voices echoed through the hallway. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, mockery, laughter. They weren't done with him yet. He knew that much. Footsteps. Heavy and deliberate. Malik straightened his posture as the sound approached, his instincts sharpening. The door creaked open, and there stood Bradley Cole, flanked by Dawson and Tanner. Cole's arms were crossed, his face twisted into a smirk that barely concealed the hostility boiling beneath the surface. Comfortable? Cole asked, leaning against the doorframe. Malik didn't answer. Guess not, Cole continued, stepping into the room. You're probably sitting there wondering how you ended up here. What went wrong? Malik's eyes locked onto Cole's, unflinching. I'll tell you what went wrong, Cole said, lowering his voice. You forgot your place. Dawson chuckled from the doorway. That's the problem with guys like him. They think they're untouchable. Malik tilted his head slightly. Guys like me? Cole's smirk faltered for just a second, but it returned just as quickly. Don't play dumb, he snapped. You walk around like the rules don't apply to you. Like you're better than the rest of us. You're scared, Malik said, his voice low but steady. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Cole's jaw tightened. Watch yourself. Scared of what? Malik pressed, leaning forward slightly. A man walking out of a bar. Or the fact that he didn't flinch when you tried to humiliate him. Cole stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt, inches away from the holster. Malik noticed it but didn't move. He didn't have to. Careful, Cole warned. Malik stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Cole's. Or what? You'll hit me. Shoot me. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. We both know you already crossed that line. The question is, how far are you willing to take it? Cole's face reddened, but before he could respond, Tanner stepped in. Brad, let's go. We got what we need here. Cole hesitated but eventually stepped back. This isn't over, he muttered before turning and walking out, slamming the door behind him. Malik sat back down, his mind racing. He knew men like Cole, men who thrived on control, who needed others to feel small to make themselves feel big. But Cole had miscalculated. Malik wasn't small. And he wasn't done. Hours passed. The night dragged on, broken only by the occasional footsteps in the hall or the clink of keys against metal. Malik didn't sleep. Instead, he replayed every moment in his head, analyzing, calculating. By morning, he had a plan. When the door opened again, it was a different officer, a younger one, with nervous eyes and a hesitant posture. You're free to go, he said, avoiding eye contact. Malik stood without a word and followed him out. As he stepped into the main area of the station, he saw Cole at the far end of the room, watching. Malik didn't look away. Neither did Cole. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the pavement. Malik took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Hey, it's me, he said as the call connected. I need a favor. The voice on the other end responded quickly, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Yeah, Malik said. It's serious. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His next steps had to be precise, every move calculated. Cole and his crew thought they had buried him, but Malik was already digging his way out. Over the next few days, Malik began to piece together information. He spent hours online, reading articles, digging through records, and making calls. Cole wasn't just another bad cop, he was part of a network, a tightly woven group that thrived on intimidation and fear. Complaints had been filed against them before, but none had stuck. Witnesses disappeared, evidence went missing, and cases were dropped without explanation. Malik wasn't surprised. Men like Cole knew how to cover their tracks. But Malik wasn't looking for tracks, he was looking for cracks. He found one. A woman named Lisa Bennett had filed a complaint against Cole 6 months earlier. Her brother had been arrested under suspicious circumstances, and when she pushed for answers, her car was vandalized, her home was broken into, and the case was suddenly closed. Malik called her. At first, she was hesitant, afraid. But as Malik explained what had happened to him, her voice steadied. She agreed to meet. They sat in a quiet diner, her hands trembling slightly as she slid a folder across the table. "Everything I could find," she said. "But it won't be enough. They'll bury this like they buried everything else." Malik opened the folder, scanning the pages. Photos, emails, internal memos, pieces of a puzzle that was finally starting to take shape. "They won't bury this," Malik said. Lisa's eyes searched his face. "How can you be so sure?" "Because they don't know who they're dealing with," he replied. As he left the diner, Malik's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his old contacts in the Navy. "Got what you need. Let me know when you're ready." Malik's lips curved into a slight smile. He was ready. But Cole and his crew? They had no idea what was coming. The air inside the dimly lit interrogation room was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Malik sat calmly in the hard metal chair, his fingers interlaced and resting on the table. Across from him, Bradley Cole leaned back, arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck twitched. Cole's eyes burned with anger, but Malik's expression was steady, calm, almost unnervingly so. He had been here before, not in this exact room, but in places like it, where pressure was a weapon and silence could suffocate. He knew the game Cole was trying to play. Cole broke the silence first. "You really think this is gonna work?" His voice was low, controlled, but Malik could hear the strain. "You think you can walk in here, throw around accusations, and come out clean?" Malik didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, studying Cole's face, the beads of sweat beginning to form along his temple. "I don't think," Malik said finally, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I know." Cole leaned forward, his palms slamming down on the table. "You're out of your damn mind." Malik didn't flinch. "You should probably lower your voice, Officer Cole. Or should I say, former officer? Because after tonight, that badge isn't going to mean a damn thing." Cole's face darkened, his composure cracking. "You don't scare me." "I'm not trying to scare you," Malik said, his tone steady. "I'm trying to help you understand what's about to happen. You picked the wrong man to humiliate. And now, the world is going to see exactly who you are." Cole's hand twitched toward his belt, but he stopped himself, his breathing quickening. Malik leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor only making Cole angrier. "You think you're untouchable?" Cole hissed. "You don't know what you're messing with." Malik's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Neither do you." Before Cole could respond, the door burst open. Dawson and Tanner stepped inside, their faces pale, their movements sharp with panic. "We have a problem," Dawson said, his voice low but urgent. Cole shot them a look. "Not now." "Yes. Now." Tanner shoved a tablet into Cole's hands. "It's all over the news. The videos, everything. Someone leaked it." Malik's eyes never left Cole's face as it drained of color. He could see the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. The footage of the arrest, the humiliation, the threats, they were out there now. Viral. Cole gripped the tablet so hard his knuckles turned white. "How?" Malik finally spoke. "You thought you erased it, didn't you? The footage from the bar. The security cameras. The bystanders. You thought you could make it all disappear. But the thing about the truth, Cole, is that it doesn't stay buried." Cole's breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling with each sharp inhale. "You son of a..." Before he could finish, Dawson stepped closer. "Brad, listen to me. Internal Affairs is already involved. There's a federal investigation starting. They're bringing in the FBI." Cole snapped his head toward Dawson. "What are you talking about?" "They found the complaints," Tanner said quietly. "All of them. Every case you buried, every witness you intimidated. It's all coming back up. Malik watched the cracks deepen. Cole's bravado was slipping fast, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. You did this, Cole spat, turning back to Malik. No, Malik said. You did this, to yourself. Cole lunged, but Tanner caught him, pulling him back. Don't. Not here. Cole's breathing was ragged now, his chest heaving as he tried to process what was happening. Malik stayed seated, unmoving, his eyes steady. You think this is over? Cole hissed, his voice shaking. You think this means you win? Malik finally stood, his towering frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the room. He stepped closer, his voice low but heavy. This isn't about winning, Cole, Malik said. It's about accountability. It's about making sure no one else ends up in this chair because of you. Cole's lips curled into something between a sneer and a snarl. You're gonna regret this. No, Malik said, his voice firm. You are. The door swung open again, this time revealing two men in suits, FBI agents. The room fell silent as they stepped inside. Bradley Cole, one of them said, holding up a warrant. You're under arrest. Cole froze, his face contorting as the words hit him. For what? He snapped. For obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and civil rights violations, the agent replied. Dawson and Tanner exchanged nervous glances, stepping back as the agents approached. This is a mistake, Cole barked as one of the agents pulled out a pair of handcuffs. No, Malik said, stepping aside. This is justice. Cole's eyes burned with hatred as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. He struggled, but the agents held firm. You'll regret this. Cole shouted as they dragged him out of the room. You'll all regret this. Malik didn't flinch. Instead, he stood there, watching as the man who had tried to break him was finally brought down. Tanner lingered behind, his eyes darting nervously between Malik and the door. What about us? Tanner asked quietly. Malik stared at him for a long moment before speaking. That's up to you, Malik said. But if you think this is over, you're wrong. Tanner swallowed hard and quickly left the room. Malik took a slow breath, letting the silence settle around him. The weight in his chest eased, but the fire inside him hadn't dimmed. This wasn't over. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something bigger. And Malik Carter wasn't walking away. Not until it was finished. The station was quieter now, but the tension lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Malik stood in the hallway, his back against the wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He could still hear Cole's shouts echoing in his ears, but the sound was fading. What remained was the look in Cole's eyes, the wild panic, the desperation. It wasn't over for Cole, not by a long shot. But for Malik, this was only the beginning. Footsteps approached, and Malik turned to see Tanner standing just outside the doorway, his shoulders hunched, his face pale. He hesitated before stepping closer. You think this fixes anything? Tanner asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Malik didn't move. No, he said. But it's a start. Tanner shifted uncomfortably. You don't get it, do you? His voice cracked, and for the first time, Malik heard something that sounded like fear. You don't know what you've done. Malik's eyes narrowed. I know exactly what I've done. Tanner shook his head. No. You don't. Cole, he's not the only one. There are others. People higher up. People who don't want this kind of attention. Malik stepped closer, his voice steady. Are you saying this goes beyond Cole? Tanner hesitated, then nodded. You think he acted alone? You think the reports just disappeared by accident? They've been protecting him for years. Malik's jaw tightened. And you let them? Tanner looked away. You think it's that simple? You don't say no to guys like Cole. You can't. Malik's voice dropped, sharp as a blade. You can. Tanner's eyes flicked back to Malik's. And what happens when they come after you? When they come after your family? What then? Malik stepped even closer, his towering frame forcing Tanner to back up. You let them win, Malik said, his voice low but heavy with conviction. That's what happens. You let them win, and people like Cole keep doing what they're doing, until someone stops them. Tanner swallowed hard. And you think you're that someone? Malik didn't blink. I know I am. Tanner exhaled sharply and looked away. You're gonna get yourself killed. Maybe, Malik said, stepping past him. But at least I won't go down quiet. Malik pushed through the doors and into the cool night air, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. He didn't look back. But Tanner did. Inside the station, Dawson was pacing. His hands were shaking, and his shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. He looked up when Tanner walked in. Did you talk to him? Dawson asked. Tanner nodded but said nothing. Well? Dawson pressed. Tanner's voice was tight. He's not backing down. Dawson swore under his breath. We're screwed. Not if we handle it, Tanner said, his voice steadier now, but his eyes betrayed him. Handle it? Dawson scoffed. You saw what just happened. They came for Cole, and they're not stopping there. If he talks, if he keeps digging, Tanner cut him off. I know. Dawson's voice dropped. So what do we do? Tanner didn't answer right away. He looked at the door Malik had just walked through, his jaw tight. Maybe it's time to stop running, Tanner said quietly. Dawson's head snapped up. Are you out of your mind? You saw what they did to Cole. You think they'll let us walk away? Tanner looked at him, and for the first time, there was something different in his eyes, resolve. I think we've been letting fear run our lives long enough. Dawson shook his head. You're crazy. Maybe, Tanner said. But Malik's right about one thing. This doesn't end unless someone makes it end. Dawson stared at him, disbelief and fear written across his face. But Tanner didn't back down. Meanwhile, Malik walked to his car, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, Lisa. He answered. Tell me you've got something, Malik said. Lisa's voice was tense. More than something. I found the files you asked for. Malik's grip tightened on the phone. And you were right, Lisa said. Cole wasn't acting alone. There are records, transactions, meetings, connections to higher-ups in the department. This goes deep, Malik. Deeper than I thought. Malik exhaled slowly. Send me everything. I already did, Lisa said. But you need to be careful. If they know you have this, I'll handle it, Malik said, his voice steady. Lisa hesitated. You sure about this? Malik didn't hesitate. I've never been more sure. When he hung up, Malik leaned back in his seat, the weight of what he had just heard settling over him. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed made it feel heavier. He looked up at the station, the lights still burning inside. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Inside, Tanner sat alone in the break room, his hands shaking as he stared at his reflection in the window. He knew Malik was coming back. And he knew, when he did, everything would change. For the first time in his life, Tanner felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. But hope wasn't enough. Not yet. Because Malik wasn't finished. And neither was Tanner. The storm hadn't passed. It was only just beginning. Malik stood in the parking lot of the police station, the night air pressing against him like an invisible weight. The echoes of Cole's arrest still lingered in his mind, the snap of the cuffs, the anger in Cole's voice, the fear disguised as rage. But Malik knew this wasn't the end. Cole was just one piece of a larger machine, and Malik had only begun to dismantle it. His phone buzzed in his pocket again. Lisa. He answered without hesitation. What is it? Her voice was sharp, urgent. They know, Malik. They know we're digging. I've been getting calls, blocked numbers, hang-ups. Someone's watching me. Malik's jaw tightened. He glanced around the lot, his eyes scanning the shadows. Stay calm. You're safe right now. Did you secure the files? Yes, she said quickly, but her voice trembled. But Malik, this isn't just about Cole anymore. The emails I found, they connect to higher-ups, like I told you. And some of them? They're already trying to bury this. Malik's eyes darkened. They won't. I hope you're right, she said. Because if we're wrong about this, if we push too far, we're not wrong, Malik interrupted. This is what they do. They intimidate, they manipulate, and when that doesn't work, they destroy. But not this time. Not with me. Lisa hesitated. And what if it's bigger than we thought? Malik let her words hang in the air. He already knew it was bigger. He had known the moment Cole looked him in the eyes and tried to crush him under the weight of his authority. But the bigger the threat, the harder Malik was willing to push back. Then we take it all down, he said finally. Malik ended the call and stepped toward his car. His muscles ached with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp, alive with purpose. The fight wasn't over, and the consequences were only just beginning. Back inside the station, Tanner paced the empty hallway, his thoughts racing. He had spent years playing along, keeping his head down, and convincing himself he didn't have a choice. But now the truth was out, and Malik wasn't backing down. The door opened behind him, and Dawson walked in, his face pale and tense. They're coming for us, Dawson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tanner looked up. Who? Internal Affairs. FBI. Everyone, Dawson said, his hands trembling. They're not just looking at Cole, they're looking at us. Everything we covered up. Every report we buried. It's all coming out. Tanner swallowed hard. Maybe it's time it did. Dawson's eyes widened. What? Are you crazy? Do you know what's going to happen to us? They'll ruin us. Our careers, our lives, it's over. Tanner stepped closer, his voice steady. You think I don't know that? But what choice do we have now? Malik didn't stop when we shoved him against that car. He didn't stop when we locked him in a cell. And he's not going to stop now. Dawson shook his head. You're scared. I get it. But this isn't about right or wrong anymore. It's about survival. Tanner's jaw tightened. Maybe it's both. Before Dawson could respond, the door at the end of the hall swung open, and two agents stepped inside. Tanner felt his heart drop. This was it. The lead agent spoke first. Officers Tanner and Dawson, we need to speak with you. Now. Dawson froze, but Tanner took a breath and stepped forward. I'll talk, he said. Dawson grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Tanner pulled away. The right thing. Finally. Malik watched from across the street as the agents escorted Tanner and Dawson out of the building. Tanner's shoulders were squared, but Dawson's hands were shaking. Malik didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. There was too much left to do. His phone buzzed again. Another message, from an unknown number this time. Malik hesitated before opening it. You don't know what you're dealing with. Walk away before it's too late. Malik's stomach tightened, but his expression didn't change. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned toward his car. They wanted him afraid. They wanted him to hesitate. But Malik had spent years facing fear, and he had learned one thing: fear was just another obstacle to overcome. Inside the car, he pulled out the folder Lisa had given him. Page after page of evidence, testimony, and patterns, years of corruption laid bare. But one name stood out among the others. Captain Thomas Reed. Malik's eyes narrowed. Reed wasn't just a name on paper. He was the man who had signed off on half the cases Malik had investigated. The man who had authorized Cole's promotions. The man who had the power to make evidence disappear. And Malik knew exactly where to find him. The captain's office was dark when Malik arrived, but the door was unlocked. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. Papers were scattered across the desk, and the faint smell of cigar smoke lingered in the air. Malik's eyes swept the room, landing on a small safe in the corner. He moved toward it, but before he could reach it, the door behind him creaked open. Reed stepped inside, his broad frame blocking the doorway. "I figured you'd show up," Reed said, his voice low and steady. Malik didn't move. "You've been covering for them." Reed's lips curled into a slight smile. "You think this is about Cole? He was just a pawn. You're playing a game you can't win, Carter." Malik's jaw tightened. "I'm not playing." Reed stepped closer. "You should be. Because right now, you're outnumbered, outmatched, and out of time." Malik's eyes didn't waver. "We'll see about that." Reed smirked. "You don't get it, do you? Men like me, we don't lose. Even if I go down, someone else takes my place. And you? You'll always be the outsider." Malik took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Then I'll keep coming. One by one, until there's no one left." Reed's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "You're making a mistake." "No," Malik said. "You did." The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Reed turned, but Malik didn't move. The door opened, and two more agents stepped inside. "Captain Reed," one of them said. "We need you to come with us." Reed's eyes burned with rage as he turned back to Malik. "You think this makes you a hero?" Malik's voice was steady. "No. It makes me someone who doesn't look away." Reed was led out, his voice echoing down the hall as he shouted protests. Malik stayed behind, the weight of the moment settling over him. It wasn't over. Not yet. But it was close. Malik stood in the dimly lit hallway of the station, his eyes fixed on the reflection of himself in the glass window. The faint murmur of voices behind closed doors felt distant, almost like a memory he couldn't quite reach. His muscles ached from tension, but his mind was sharp, calculating the next steps even as the weight of everything that had unfolded pressed down on him. He had cracked the surface, exposed the rot underneath, but now the real fight was beginning. A door opened behind him. Tanner stepped out, his face pale, his movements stiff. Malik turned slowly, meeting Tanner's eyes, and for a moment, neither man spoke. "You've got no idea what you started," Tanner said finally, his voice strained. Malik tilted his head slightly. "I think I do." Tanner took a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. "You think this ends with Reed? With Cole? It doesn't. You don't understand how deep this goes." Malik's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Then explain it to me." Tanner shook his head, his voice rising. "You can't fix this. You don't just pull one thread and expect the whole thing to unravel without bringing the house down. You think you're cleaning this up? No, you're burning it all down, and people like me, we're stuck in the flames." Malik stepped closer, his eyes locked on Tanner. "You had a choice, Tanner. Every single day, you had a choice. And you chose to look the other way. So don't stand here and talk to me about flames. You lit this fire yourself." Tanner's jaw clenched, but Malik saw the flicker of shame in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there. You don't know what it's like, Tanner said, his voice quieter now. You don't know what it's like to be afraid every single day. To know that if you don't fall in line, you're next. It's easy for you to walk in here and play hero. You've got nothing to lose. Malik's eyes narrowed. You think I have nothing to lose? You think I haven't faced fear? I spent years looking men in the eyes who wanted me dead. I've been shot at, hunted, left behind. Don't talk to me about fear. I've lived it, and I didn't let it break me. Tanner looked away, his shoulders sagging. Then you're stronger than me, he said softly. Malik stepped back, his voice steady. No. I just stopped making excuses. Before Tanner could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Dawson appeared at the end of the corridor, his eyes darting nervously. He froze when he saw Malik and Tanner. What's going on? Dawson asked, his voice sharp. Malik didn't take his eyes off Tanner. Why don't you tell him? Tanner hesitated, then turned to Dawson. It's over, he said. Dawson's face twisted. What are you talking about? Tanner swallowed hard. Reed's done. Cole's done. And we're next if we don't start talking. Dawson took a step back, shaking his head. No. No, I'm not going down for this. I didn't sign up for this mess. Malik's voice cut through the tension. You did when you let it happen. Dawson turned to Tanner, his voice desperate. You can't do this. You can't just roll over and let them take us down with them. Tanner's voice cracked. We already went down with them. You just don't see it yet. Dawson stepped closer to Tanner, his voice trembling. We can fix this. We just need to keep our mouths shut and, Malik interrupted. And what? Wait for it to blow over. You think people are just going to forget? They're watching now. Cameras, reporters, the whole damn country. There's no hiding anymore. Dawson's breathing quickened. You don't get it. They're not going to let this happen. They'll come after us. After you. He pointed at Malik. You think you're untouchable. You're not. And when they come for you, no one's going to save you. Malik stepped forward, his voice sharp. Let them come. Dawson froze, staring at Malik as if he were seeing him for the first time. Malik didn't blink. He didn't waver. You're crazy, Dawson muttered, stepping back. You're out of your damn mind. Malik didn't respond. He watched as Dawson turned and walked quickly down the hall, his footsteps fading into the distance. Tanner let out a shaky breath. He's scared, he said quietly. So are you, Malik replied. Tanner nodded slowly. Yeah. But I'm not running. Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Lisa. They're moving. Reed's people. They're cleaning up evidence. Malik's jaw tightened. He looked at Tanner. Are you in? Tanner hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yeah. I'm in. Malik turned and started walking toward the exit. Tanner followed. Outside, the night was colder than before, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Malik's car was parked near the curb, but before he could reach it, he noticed a black SUV idling nearby. Tanner noticed it too. You think it's them? Malik didn't answer. He stepped closer to the SUV, his hand hovering near his pocket, where his phone rested. The window rolled down, and a man in a suit leaned out. Mr. Carter, the man said. We need to talk. Malik's eyes didn't leave the man's. Who are you? The man smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm someone who can help, or hurt you, depending on how this goes. Malik stepped closer. Try me. The man's smile faded. You've made enemies. Powerful ones. And right now, they're looking for ways to make you disappear. But I can offer you a way out. Clean. No loose ends. Malik's voice was steady. I'm not looking for a way out. The man nodded. I figured you'd say that. He handed Malik a small envelope. When you're ready to see the bigger picture, give me a call. Malik didn't take the envelope. I already see it. The man leaned back into the SUV, his eyes still locked on Malik. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. The window rolled up, and the SUV pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the night. Tanner exhaled sharply. Who the hell was that? Malik didn't answer right away. He looked down at the envelope on the ground, then back at the fading lights of the SUV. Trouble, Malik said. But nothing we can't handle. And as he stepped back toward his car, Malik knew one thing for sure, this wasn't the end. Not yet. Malik stood in the darkened parking lot, his fists clenched as the taillights of the black SUV faded into the distance. The envelope lay at his feet, the paper catching faint glimmers of light from the street lamp overhead. Tanner stood a few steps behind him, his breathing uneven, his nerves visibly unraveling. What the hell was that about? Tanner asked, his voice tight, cracking under the weight of fear. Malik didn't answer right away. He bent down, picked up the envelope, and turned it over in his hands. No markings, no logos. Just plain white paper sealed shut. He felt the weight of it, something inside, not just paper, maybe a flash drive or a key. They're scared, Malik said finally, his voice low and deliberate. Scared? Tanner took a step closer. They don't look scared to me. They look like they're about to bury us. Malik turned to face him, his eyes hard. They wouldn't be offering me a way out if they weren't scared. People in control don't make deals, they make threats. This was desperation. Tanner shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. You're not hearing me, Malik. That wasn't desperation. That was a warning. They're telling you to back off. Malik stepped closer, his voice sharp. And what do you want me to do? Walk away. Pretend none of this happened. Pretend they didn't put me in cuffs, didn't try to humiliate me, didn't spend years destroying lives while everyone looked the other way. Tanner's shoulders sagged. I don't know, man. I don't know what to do. But I know what happens to people who push too hard. They disappear. And if you think they're not capable of making that happen, then you're lying to yourself. Malik's jaw tightened. Let them try. Tanner stepped back, shaking his head. You really don't get it, do you? You think this is some war where the good guys always win? It's not. These people don't play by the rules. Malik's voice was steady. Neither do I. Tanner fell silent, his eyes searching Malik's face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. Malik turned back toward his car, sliding the envelope into his jacket pocket. You coming or not? Malik asked without looking back. Tanner hesitated but followed. Inside the car, the tension thickened as Malik pulled onto the road. Tanner kept glancing at the envelope, his knee bouncing nervously. You gonna open it? Tanner asked. Malik didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road. Not here. Why not? Tanner pressed. What if it's something we need to see right now? Malik's voice hardened. Because we don't know who's watching. Tanner exhaled sharply and slumped back in his seat, muttering under his breath. Malik didn't respond. His focus was locked on the road ahead, his mind already piecing together the next steps. Minutes later, they pulled into a small motel parking lot on the edge of town. Malik killed the engine and scanned the area before stepping out. Tanner followed reluctantly, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. Inside the motel room, Malik bolted the door and pulled the blinds shut. He dropped the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long moment before finally tearing it open. Tanner leaned in, his breath catching as Malik emptied the contents. A flash drive. Malik plugged it into his laptop and waited. Files popped up, documents, photos, emails. Tanner leaned closer, his eyes widening as the pieces began to form a picture. This is everything, Tanner whispered. Malik's eyes scanned the screen, each file revealing more than the last. Payoffs, cover-ups, surveillance logs. Names. Faces. Dates. And then he saw it, his own name. He clicked the file, and the screen filled with images. Photos of him, Lisa, even Andre. Surveillance shots, timestamps. A chill ran down his spine, but his expression remained steady. They've been watching me, Malik said. Tanner's voice cracked. This is bad, Malik. Really bad. Malik's eyes didn't leave the screen. No. This is leverage. Tanner's jaw dropped. Leverage? Are you serious? They know everything about you, about the people helping you. They're not gonna let this slide. Malik looked at him. And now we know everything about them. Every dirty deal, every cover-up. This isn't just about Cole anymore. This is about taking the whole damn system down. Tanner ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room. You think they're just gonna sit back and let you do that? They'll come after you, they'll come after all of us. Malik stood, his voice calm but commanding. Then we hit them first. Tanner stopped pacing. What? Malik turned the laptop toward him. We leak it. All of it. We make it so big, so loud, that they can't bury it. And we make sure the people responsible are the ones who go down, not us. Tanner's voice dropped. You're crazy. Maybe, Malik said. But it's the only way. Tanner's hands trembled as he looked at the files again. And what happens if it doesn't work? Malik's voice hardened. It works. Before Tanner could respond, Malik's phone buzzed. A new message. You've gone too far. Walk away. Last warning. Malik stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Then he looked back at Tanner. You ready for this? Malik asked. Tanner hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Let's end this. Malik hit send, uploading the files to multiple sources at once. News outlets, journalists, social media. Within seconds, the information began to spread, rippling outward like a shockwave. The phone buzzed again, another message. You're making a mistake. Malik's lips curled into a grim smile. No. I'm not. Tanner watched nervously as the phone buzzed again and again, but Malik didn't flinch. He had made his move, and now he was ready for whatever came next. The storm was here, and Malik wasn't backing down. The motel room felt smaller now, the air heavy with tension. Malik stood near the window, his back to Tanner, staring out at the empty parking lot. The faint hum of passing traffic barely registered in his mind. His focus was elsewhere, on the sound of Tanner's restless pacing, on the faint vibration of his phone on the table, and on the weight of the decision they had just made. Tanner finally stopped pacing, his voice sharp. We shouldn't have done it. Malik didn't turn around. We didn't have a choice. Tanner's breath came faster. No, Malik. We did. We could have stopped. We could have let it go. Malik spun around, his eyes burning. Let it go. After everything they've done. After the lives they've destroyed. You think walking away was an option? Tanner flinched but held his ground. I think survival was an option. You don't get it, they're not going to let this slide. You think putting this out there ends it? No, Malik. It just made it worse. Malik stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. Worse for who? Them. Good. Let them feel what it's like to lose control for once. Let them feel the fear they've been feeding the rest of us for years. Tanner's voice cracked. And what about us? What about Lisa? Andre? They're in this now too, and if anything happens to them, Malik's voice cut through him. Nothing is going to happen to them. You don't know that. Tanner shouted. You don't know what these people are capable of. Malik's jaw tightened. Yes, I do. Tanner's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Malik saw something raw in his eyes, guilt. I should have said something, Tanner muttered. Years ago. I should have stood up to Cole. I should have stopped this before it got this far. Malik's voice softened. You didn't. But you're here now. Tanner looked away. And what if that's not enough? It has to be, Malik said. The sudden buzz of Malik's phone made them both jump. He crossed the room and picked it up, his eyes scanning the screen. Lisa's name. He answered quickly. Lisa. What's wrong? Her voice was shaky, panicked. They know where I am, Malik. I saw a car outside my apartment. It's been sitting there for hours, and I swear I saw someone taking pictures. Malik's grip on the phone tightened. Are you inside? No, she said. I left as soon as I noticed. I'm at a coffee shop downtown, but Malik, what if they follow me? What if they already have? Malik's voice was steady. Stay there. Don't leave. I'm coming to get you. He ended the call and turned to Tanner. We need to move. Tanner hesitated. What if it's a trap? Malik grabbed his keys. Then we walk right into it. The drive to the coffee shop felt longer than it should have. Malik's eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, scanning for headlights that lingered too long, for cars that changed lanes when he did. Tanner sat in the passenger seat, fidgeting with his phone but saying nothing. When they finally arrived, Malik spotted Lisa immediately. She was seated in the corner, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Malik stepped inside, and she looked up, relief flooding her face. Malik. She stood quickly, but Malik motioned for her to sit. You're safe, he said, sitting across from her. Lisa shook her head. I don't feel safe. Tanner sat beside her, his voice low. We need to get you somewhere secure. Somewhere they can't find you. Lisa's voice cracked. You really think there's a place they can't find me? Malik leaned in. We're not letting anything happen to you, Lisa. I promise. Lisa's eyes welled up, but she nodded. Suddenly, Malik's phone buzzed again. Another message. You were warned. Last chance to walk away. Tanner saw the message over Malik's shoulder and swore under his breath. They're not bluffing, Malik. This is serious. Malik's voice was cold. So am I. Before Tanner could respond, Lisa's eyes widened. That's them. Malik followed her gaze toward the window. A black SUV was parked across the street. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the area. Tanner's voice dropped. We need to move. Now. Malik stood quickly. Lisa, come with me. They slipped out the back entrance of the shop, Malik's hand firm on Lisa's arm, Tanner close behind. The alley was dark, but Malik's senses were sharp, scanning every corner as they moved. They saw us, Tanner said, glancing back. Malik didn't slow down. Keep moving. Lisa's breath was ragged, but she kept pace. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't expect, Malik said. They reached Malik's car and piled in. As they sped down the street, Malik's mind raced. He had expected retaliation, but not this fast. They were escalating, and he knew it meant one thing: they were scared. Tanner finally spoke. "What's the plan, Malik? Because this isn't looking like it's ending anytime soon." Malik's grip on the wheel tightened. "We keep pushing. We keep the pressure on until they break." "And if we break first?" Tanner asked. Malik's voice was steady. "We won't." Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if they come after my family?" Malik glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "They won't. Because by the time they try, this'll already be over." But even as he said it, he felt the weight of the risk pressing down on him. He knew what was coming. And he knew the cost might be higher than any of them were prepared for. Tanner looked at him. "And what if it's not over? What if this just keeps going?" Malik's voice was firm. "Then we keep going too." The car fell silent as the city lights blurred past. Malik's phone buzzed again, but this time he didn't look. He already knew what it said. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. And Malik Carter was ready. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. Malik sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on the judge. Across the aisle, Bradley Cole sat stiffly in a navy suit, his face pale but defiant. Tanner was seated a few rows back, his expression tense, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. Lisa sat beside him, her eyes darting nervously between Malik and the row of officers who had come to watch. The prosecution had spent the last 2 hours presenting evidence, videos, emails, testimonies, painting a picture of corruption so deep it left the room suffocating under its weight. Malik hadn't spoken yet, but he didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge finally leaned forward, her voice steady. "Mr. Cole, do you have anything to say before sentencing is handed down?" Cole stood slowly, straightening his tie. "Your Honor," he began, his voice tight but steady, "I have served this city for over 15 years. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for the safety of the people who trusted me to protect them." Malik's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Cole continued, his voice growing harder. "This entire case is built on the word of a man with a grudge. A man who—" "Enough," the judge interrupted, her voice sharp. "I've seen the evidence. I've read the reports. And I've listened to the testimonies of witnesses who described years of abuse, intimidation, and violence under your watch. You didn't protect this city, Mr. Cole. You preyed on it." Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The judge turned to Malik. "Mr. Carter, is there anything you would like to add before sentencing?" Malik stood slowly. The courtroom felt smaller as every eye turned toward him. He took a breath, steadying himself. For years, Malik began, men like Cole believed they were untouchable. They counted on silence. On fear. They believed that as long as no one spoke up, they could keep doing whatever they wanted, no matter who got hurt. He looked directly at Cole. But silence doesn't mean acceptance. And fear doesn't last forever. Cole's eyes burned with hatred, but Malik didn't waver. "This case isn't just about me," Malik continued. "It's about every person who was told to sit down, to stay quiet, to let it go. It's about accountability. About making sure this doesn't happen again." The judge nodded and turned back to Cole. "Bradley Cole, this court finds you guilty on all counts, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and abuse of power. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." A gasp rippled through the room, but Malik didn't react. Cole's face drained of color, his confidence crumbling as the judge's words sank in. "Take him into custody," the judge ordered. The bailiff stepped forward, and for the first time, Cole resisted. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You don't know what you're starting." His voice echoed through the room as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. Malik watched as Cole was dragged away, his protests fading into the distance. Tanner exhaled sharply, slumping back in his seat. Lisa leaned into him, relief washing over her face. Malik finally allowed himself to sit, his body relaxing for the first time in weeks. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions and flashing cameras. Malik stepped through the crowd, his head held high, his steps deliberate. Tanner and Lisa followed closely behind, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Malik," one reporter shouted. "What's next for you?" Malik stopped, turning to face the cameras. "Justice doesn't stop here," he said. "This case wasn't just about one man or one department. It was about a system that needs to change. And until it does, I'll keep fighting." The crowd erupted with more questions, but Malik turned and walked away. Later that night, Malik sat alone in his apartment, the city lights flickering through the windows. His phone buzzed, and he glanced down to see a message from Lisa. "Thank you for everything." Malik smiled faintly and set the phone aside. The fight wasn't over. He knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel before. Hope. Tanner eventually found a way to make amends. He cooperated fully with the investigation, exposing the inner workings of the department's corruption. He wasn't a hero, but he was a man who had chosen to stop running. And that was enough. Lisa went on to work with advocacy groups, using her story and her platform to push for reform. She wasn't afraid anymore. Malik had made sure of that. As for Malik, his life didn't slow down. The calls kept coming, the cases kept piling up, and the battles kept appearing. But he faced them the same way he had faced everything else, with strength, determination, and purpose. Because Malik Carter wasn't just a man who fought back. He was a man who refused to lose. And now, let's take a moment to reflect on this story. This wasn't just a story about corruption or revenge. It was a story about courage. About standing up when the world tries to knock you down. It's about the power of one voice, one action, to create change. How many times do we let fear silence us? How often do we tell ourselves it's not worth the risk to fight back? But Malik's story reminds us that fear is only as strong as we allow it to be. And justice doesn't come from waiting, it comes from action. So now, I want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Were you rooting for Malik? Did you see yourself in his struggle, or in Tanner's fear? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your reactions, and your own experiences. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or inspired you, make sure to subscribe to Tales of Twist for more stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue to tell stories that challenge, inspire, and keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching, and remember, the fight for justice starts with you.